Welcome to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, a podcast designed to help you increase your influence, develop your leadership, and maximize your results.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode, the last episode in this little mini series on Keystone habits. And today we're talking about Keystone habits in the social dimension of life, or the relational dimension of life. And as I mentioned in the last podcast episode, we don't always stop to think about the choices that we make in those first three dimensions of life are really heavily determining our influence in the social dimension of life, right? The habits that we create for ourselves, the choices that we make in our physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of our lives are influencing the influence or determining and affecting the influence that we have with other people. But it's absolutely possible for us to be intentional about creating keystone habits in that social dimension of life. It's going to help us increase our influence, going to help us with our relationships. It's absolutely going to help us move forward. And, this applies personally, it applies professionally, it applies at work, it applies in your community, it applies in a volunteer organization. It's absolutely possible to intentionally build our influence. We do have to be intentional about it, though. It doesn't just happen by accident. And it's interesting that the same principles that help us influence effectively at work or in our career help us influence effectively at home as well, right? So the same principles that help us increase influence affect us in our personal relationships and our personal lives just as much as the professional side of us. So that's almost more of a reason to think about how do we intentionally leverage and increase our influence. Now, something that I think we have to touch on here, as I talk about keystone habit in this dimension of life, it's important to think about this as a journey, right? It's not a destination. You don't just wake up one day and you get to say, you know what, I'm done focusing on being intentional with life. You don't get to do that. This is a journey that we travel, hopefully continue to travel. It's not a destination. We wake up one day and we just say, you know what, I've arrived. I can quit worrying about that. Um, we just always have to be conscious of growth as a journey. It's not that we get to a certain point and we stop. It's that we get to a certain point and we can see a little bit higher or a little bit further over the mountain than we could. And so we keep climbing. And so as we climb a little higher, we can see a little bit more, but we keep climbing and we keep climbing, right? And we get to the top of this mountain, there's always going to be another mountain for us to climb, because that's what growth is, right? Growth is continuing to grow and reach. And we see this, and I have this just mental image of this giant oak tree, right? It starts out as just an acorn and it grows, but it doesn't get to 2 feet tall and say, okay, I'm done, right? That tree just continues to grow and continues to grow. And as it grows, it gets stronger, right? And I think that we're the same way, that as we continue our growth journey, we get more solid, right? We get stronger. The longer we grow, the stronger we become, particularly as we apply that to one specific area of life. So when I talk about the keystone habit for the social dimension of life, I think that the one foundational keystone habit here is being intentional about and making it a habit to build great relationships. But you have to preface that with the understanding that you are building great relationships to add value to other people. You are not building great relationships to manipulate people or use them. And that's a very key distinction, right? Are you trying to manipulate somebody, or are you trying to simply build a great relationship and add value to them? Because here's the thing, if you try to manipulate somebody, they absolutely feel it, right? You feel it when somebody tries to manipulate you or take advantage of you. You feel that. And that's not a good feeling. That doesn't increase their influence with you when you feel like somebody's trying to manipulate you or come out on top or use you to their advantage. That's not an influence builder. And so when I say be intentional and create the habit of building great relationships with people, it's absolutely with the understanding that you are building that relationship simply with the intention to add value. Um, and that's it. That's a key difference. So make sure that you go into this with this perspective. So what does it look like to have a habit of building great relationships with people? I mean, that's kind of, it sounds interesting, but how do we do it? What does it look like? You know, the reason that this is so important is several years ago, I was probably back in, I want to say it was probably back in 2012 when I first read The 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. And it's a fabulous leadership book. If you have not read it, really does a great job of describing the levels of leadership. And we know leadership is influence. So it could have been titled The 5 Levels of Influence. And it really helped me understand how to effectively increase my influence by growing through those levels of leadership. It really helped me just put a language around the skill of developing influence. And like anything, when we know how to speak the language, it's much easier to be intentional about it. And so it really helped me. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I will share this with you. Maxwell talks about the 5 levels of leadership. The first level is position, right? And that's a title, whether it's, you're the owner of a company and you have a title as the owner, or maybe you are a manager and you have people who report to you, or maybe you're a parent and you have kids, right? Whatever that role is, that title or that position, it comes with some authority, but it does not necessarily come with true, authentic influence. There's a difference between authority and authentic influence, right? The position carries with it some authority. It does not necessarily carry with it true, authentic influence. That is determined by our character. We touched on that just a couple of episodes ago. So if you haven't listened to all of the episodes in this little 5 mini series on Keystone Habits, go back and listen to the first 4 episodes because they really set the foundation for what I'm talking about here today. So the first level, as Maxwell talks about, the first level of leadership, but the first level of influence is position. And it's interesting because he talks about that's the lowest level of influence, right? There is a little bit of influence that comes with that position, but not much. Because at the end of the day, people who follow us only because they have to will only do what they have to. And we can see this play out over and over and over again in the culture of an organization, the culture of a home and a family, that people who we don't have true authentic influence with them, they don't have to follow us. Then if they don't want to follow us, they won't. And so we don't really have a lot of influence at that level. Well, the next level is where it really starts to become insightful. Maxwell talks about the second level of leadership is the permission level of leadership. And the key word he says is relationships. And that's really where I think our keystone habit comes in, is intentionally having that habit of building great relationships with people. Because at this level, we influence people because of the relationship that we have with them, right? People follow us at this level because they want to. And it's really our character that determines, are we just going to try to, bully people and make people do what we want to, or are we truly building a relationship with them with the intent of adding value to them and hopefully influencing them in a positive way, right? That's what the permission level is if I'm following you, then I'm giving you permission to influence me. And of course it goes both ways. We all influence and we all are influenced by other people. So key thing to remember there. But the reason that this was so, the levels of leadership is impactful because like with anything, when we know how to talk about it, we can more easily apply it. But the reason I think that this is so powerful is that so many of us, especially at work or in our business or in our career, a lot of times, and even more so if we tend to be a task focused person, it's very easy to forget about the relationship side of people. And you never get to do that, right? When it comes down to influence with people, you never get to forget about building those relationships. You don't ever get to forget about caring about people and adding value to people if you want to continue to influence them effectively. It's just the way it works. See, the thing is that leadership and influence is relational, because if you don't know me, you don't trust me, and I don't have any influence with you, right? There's not a lot of influence there if there's no relationship, because if we don't know somebody, we're not likely to trust them. It's just human and human nature. And so when we think about that, it's important to think about how do we go about just having the habit of building great relationships. Do you have that habit? See, I'm more of a naturally task oriented person, and then there again, there's no better way to be people oriented or task oriented. We all have our strengths, and of course we all have areas that we are not as strong in. I tend to be very task oriented naturally, and there again, that can be a great asset. If you're going on vacation, you want me to go with you because I will pack, I'll have all of the things that everyone else forgot to pack. I tend to be very checklist oriented and organized and planning ahead and knocking off the tasks on my to-do list. It's just a natural strength for me. And that organizational planning task side of me just it's just part of me. But recognizing that, particularly in a leadership environment, I realize that I have to be particularly careful that I'm not forgetting about the relationship side of people in my just zeal to get things done and check off my to-do list. I absolutely have to make sure that I'm being intentional about those relationships along the way. And it's easy for me to just be wrapped up in my to-do list and checking off the boxes. And so that's why I say, particularly if you are a task focused person like me, you especially have to be more intentional about creating, building, and maintaining those relationships. And there again, not with the intent to use somebody, but just with the intent to add value and to grow. So, what does it look like to have a habit of building great relationships? I talked about a couple of podcast episodes ago about being intentional about using and learning and remembering somebody's name. And I will tell you that I think is you're probably one of your number one of the number one assets in building great relationships and having that habit. Just make it a habit of when you meet somebody, you learn and use their name. And I know, a lot of you are thinking, I'm not really good with names. I talked to a lady the other day. I was in the store in the produce department, and she was in the produce department, and she is one of the people who goes around and puts together orders for people who've like ordered through Instacart or ordered online or curbside pickup or something like that. And so I typically try, if we're in town and not traveling, I tend to do my grocery shopping and all of that on basically the same earlier in the day, right? Maybe the same day of the week if it works out. But I have a pretty good routine schedule if we're in town and not traveling. And so if someone is there regularly at the same time, I tend to see them pretty often. And this one lady, she's so sweet. Her name is Robin. And I said something. I just said good morning to her as we're navigating the produce department, and we're the only two people in the banana section at 6:30 in the morning. And I just said, hey, good morning. And she said hello and how are you and that kind of thing. And in a moment, I just said, hey, what's your name? And she said, well, I'm Robin. And she kind of smiled, as most people do. When you ask somebody's name, they smile because they feel like you value them as a person. I guarantee you, try it. It's awesome. And we just exchanged a little bit of small talk, and we went on. Well, the following week I went back in, and guess who was in the produce department, as she often is? Robin. And so I'm just running by, and I picked up my bag of carrots, and I said, good morning, Robin. And she just looked at me, this big old smile, and she just said, good morning. It's almost like she was shocked that I spoke to her and just remembered her name. And we made just a little bit of small talk, and I was about to walk away, and she said, well, what's your name? And so I told her my name, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna try to remember that. She's like, I'm not good at remembering names, but I'm gonna try to remember that. And so, I hear a lot of people who talk about, I'm just not good with names. And absolutely, some of us are more gifted at names than others, but every single one of us can intentionally develop that skill. And, I've interacted with her just a couple of times over the course of a week. Um, and, she's encountered hundreds of people and throughout her day and her job and home life and all of that. And yet she was intentionally saying to herself, she's making the effort to try and remember my name. And that really made an impression on me. Because when it comes to forming those relationships, right? With people, the little things are the big things. It doesn't take much with people to really add value to them and add value to the relationship. It also doesn't take much to decrease the value that you're bringing to them in that relationship. Because every single interaction, we are building influence with somebody, or we are decreasing, minimizing our influence with somebody. And it's so easy to forget that, right? It's so easy to just have a bad day at work, and you come home and there's dirty dishes in the sink and the trash is full, and you're like, I've been at work all day, and yet why couldn't somebody take out the trash? And so somebody says, hey, how are you? And you just, you blow up. You're like, oh, I'm terrible. There's trash overflowing and there's dirty dishes in the sink and all. Right? It's just so easy to let those emotions in the moment, just pressure from the day and all, we just snap in the moment. We just, take it out on the person that came up to us, and we didn't mean it, right? I know I'm not the only one who said or done something and thought later, oh man, I shouldn't have said or done that. Right there again, we're emotional creatures. But what I'm saying is, just because those emotions are there doesn't mean we have to take it out on the people around us. Right. And it's not ignoring that we have emotions, but just recognizing we don't need to blow up and splatter them everywhere on people. That was a great visual there, wasn't it? So just thinking about being intentional, and I encourage you to just pick one relationship and just try this for a week. Don't try to do this with every relationship in your life. You'll go crazy trying to do that. Just pick one relationship in your life and spend the next 7 days, and just every single day think of 1 to 3 things that you can do to add value to that relationship, to that person, to increase your influence. And there again, not because you're trying to manipulate them, but because you really just want to start creating this habit of building great relationships. What would that look like? So just pick one. Now, I'll tell you, it's easier if you pick somebody who's living in your household, right? Your spouse or your children even. If you pick somebody who you don't see every day, obviously it's going to be really more difficult to do, but it can be done. But just pick one relationship and just carry this experiment out and be intentional. 1 to 3 things. What can I do? What am I going to do tomorrow? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to offer to do this. I'm going to do this without being, without them even asking me. I'm going to go the extra mile or the extra inch in this one relationship for a week, and just watch what happens. I guarantee you the results will be incredible. Because if you haven't been intentional about putting deposits into that emotional bank account in that relationship, then just watch how you start to be intentional about putting deposits in. That balance is just going to grow, right? Just like with your bank account. And the other thing that I would like to say on this, when we talk about building great relationships, I think it's important to recognize that not everybody likes to be valued the same way. And when I say that, I come back to the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. So there we go again with another book with 5 in the title, but it really, Gary Chapman's book, somebody gave it to us as a wedding gift, but we didn't read it I think we started it, but we didn't really dig into it for several years. But the 5 love languages that Gary Chapman talk about that most of us have 1 or 2 ways that we like to feel appreciated. So for example, maybe you're a gifts person and you feel loved and special when somebody buys you something or picks flowers and brings you flowers or gives you a pretty necklace, or they picked up a blouse the other day in the store because they were thinking of you, and so that makes you feel loved. Or maybe you're a quality time person where you feel like the relationship is so strong when you're spending quality time with that person. Maybe it's time watching a movie, maybe it's talking on the phone or just great conversation, but just quality time and interaction, right? So there are 5 love languages, and I won't get into all of them, but you've got the picture, right? Each of us mostly have a primary way of we like to receive affection. The problem is that most of us are speaking in our language, and that's not necessarily the language of the other person. So if you're a gifts person and you just naturally feel loved when somebody buys you gifts, odds are that you probably express appreciation for someone or show affection or love for someone by buying them a gift, because that makes you feel loved, right? That makes you feel warm and fuzzy. So when you want to reciprocate that, you go buy them something. But if they're a quality time person and you buy them a piece of jewelry, they're going to be like, I would much rather have spent 2 hours talking with you than gotten this necklace. And so it's very easy for us to talk in one language, our language, and yet that's not necessarily what the other person needs to feel affirmation or love or caring or the relationship. Now, this absolutely could apply in the professional environment. It wouldn't be the love languages. Gary Chapman talks about that in terms of languages of appreciation, but absolutely, we naturally have one way that we're like, this is how I feel appreciated. And so if you're in a professional environment, especially if you are the leader, you've got to be really intentional about, learning, how does this person like to be appreciated, acknowledged? Is this person love to hear praise, right? Maybe they want to be publicly recognized. Maybe just sending them a nice note is a way they feel appreciated. Or maybe they want some one-on-one time with you as the leader, right? Most of them would love to have some, but especially if they're a quality time person, that can go a huge way in developing that relationship and making them feel appreciated. So you see this plays out in a lot of different ways, a lot of different aspects, but that's what I'm encouraging you to do. Pick one relationship and be intentional about adding value to that relationship, because this is the keystone habit that launches your influence, right? If there's no relationship, there's very little to no influence, authentic influence. And it doesn't matter if you can get all the tasks done if you're failing miserably at the relationships in your life. And the relationships are what's determining our influence to begin with. So the keystone habit here for this social dimension is just make it a habit to build great relationships, and that can start with learning people's names, and then it can figure out what do they like, how do they like to feel appreciated, learn to care about them, right? And this might be just being interested in people. I guarantee you the number one way to increase your influence with people is learning to listen. Learn to listen. Get really great at listening, because when you ask people questions and you listen to the answers, they feel like you care about them. And there's no quicker way to increase your influence than making somebody feel like you care about them. Because we as people all want to feel like people care about us, right? We have that need to feel appreciated and cared about. And the people who make us feel valued are going to have the greatest influence. So what's funny to me though is, we have high school and then college, and we spend years, going through college and going through high school and all of that. We spend years working on our writing skills, typing or keyboarding skills, public speaking skills, but there's not a lot of time in those early years spent focusing on our listening skills. And that's a shame, because listening is such an important tool when it comes to influence. So if you're not naturally a great listener, get a book on listening to people, right? Get a book on connecting with people. I talked about a couple of podcast episodes ago about my book, Straight Talk, The Power of Effective communication, and how there's a whole chapter in there dedicated on tips of ways that help you remember people's names, right? If that's not a strength for you, go get a resource that helps you get strong. You can pick that book up on my website. You can pick it up on Amazon. It's not the only book on connection with people and communication and listening and that kind of thing. It's certainly not the only book out there. It's just one resource, but if you need a resource, go find a resource, right? There's just a wealth of information on that. And listening is such a powerful, powerful way to build your relationship with somebody. It's going to increase your influence. It's going to increase your effectiveness at an ability to develop that relationship at a much deeper level. So, I hope this gives you some really good insights. We talked about several of the keystone habits in each dimension of life and how that plays out. And there again, the moment we just start to become intentional is the moment we discover our ability to grow in one area and dimension of life is exponential, and it helps us. You almost cannot grow really far in one dimension of life without it starting to help pull the other dimensions of life along. And that's the beauty of it, right? Start growing and being intentional with your growth, and that will help you as it just kind of oozes over into the other dimensions of your life and helps you become more intentional in all areas of life. And more intentional becomes more effective, and that equals better outcomes, better results, and better opportunities. Until next time.